Welcome to the First Responder Wellness Podcast. I'm your host, Conrad Weaver, and I'm so glad that you've joined us today. My guest is Dr. Stephanie Conn, a former officer, dispatcher, and now a board-certified psychologist who specializes in supporting first responders. Stephanie has a deep understanding of what it's like to wear the uniform and what it takes to stay resilient under pressure. In today's conversation, we talk about the power of peer support. We give real tools for managing trauma and stress, why sleep and breathing matter more than you think, and how you can build what she calls mental armor to protect yourself long term. She's also the author of the book, Increasing Resilience in Police and Emergency Personnel, which has just been updated and expanded. And she's got another one on peer support coming out soon. Hey, be sure to listen to the end of the show for a teaser for what's coming next week. Next week is episode number 100 of the First Responder Wellness Podcast, and I have put together a really special episode, and I cannot wait to share it with you. So for today, grab a pen. You're going to want to take notes on this one. Let's dive in. Here's my conversation with Dr. Stephanie Conn. Well, Stephanie, it's about time I have you on the show. I met you, I don't know how many years ago, and it's like, I need to have you on my podcast. And finally, here you are. Welcome to the First Responder Wellness Podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I don't know why it's taken so long.
Well, it's probably my fault. I get busy and I forget to reach out and forget to follow up. And so sometimes it happens and then life happens,
Yeah.
So, but here you are. So tell us a little bit about you. What do you do and who do you work with?
I grew up a cop's daughter. My dad was a police officer for almost 40 years, and he was a chief for well over half of it. And so grew up in that line of work. I went in and became a dispatcher, went to the other side of the radio, became an officer. When I was a dispatcher, there was a very funny and equally attractive guy, who you've met, who you know, that was an officer at that department. And I actually followed my own advice, and I waited to date him until I changed departments. And then we started dating, and 26 years later, we're still together. And so he's medically retired from policing now. But when I was an officer, I was a peer support team member. One of my coworkers was killed in the line of duty, and we had a police psychologist when Hank was killed. And he was a great help to us at a time when we needed a great deal of help that was culturally competent. About a year later, another coworker was killed in the line of duty, Dwayne, and we had a changing of the guard from a police psychologist to a city psychologist who was qualified as a psychologist, but just didn't have the cultural competency, the understanding of the profession, and didn't put forth much effort, as I understand it, from others, including the past psychologists. And so when my peers are asking for support and asking who they can talk to about not just about that, but about marital issues or about stress issues, they would not take a referral to someone that didn't understand them. And I couldn't find anyone that understood them. So I made the very calculated, very carefully considered choice. I thought, okay, I'm going to step out of policing, going to get my chops in the psychology world so that I can be helpful to others, obviously not my friends and peers, but to others. And then I'll come back into policing when I'm done, and I'm going to, because I love it and I want to be able to do both. And once I stepped out and got my PhD in counseling psychology and put my little shingle up and said, hey, here's who I am and who I want to support. It was all she wrote. It was just like, oh, wait, there's somebody that actually spent some time in this profession and knows us. And so, and I also, just for good measure, while getting my PhD, I did victim service on call work. So I was still going out with the officers on the next of kin notifications or the death scenes or accident scenes, just so that I was continuing to stay in the muck, so that my relevancy and understanding of that was up to date. So
how much did the traumas that you faced as an officer, even as a dispatcher, how much did your education in psychology speak to that? Did it help you kind of resolve some of those things? What was that process like for you?
Yeah, I think it put names to things. I always found it really interesting because I would be reading something about a concept around coping mechanisms or, neuroscience of why this happens versus that happens. And it was interesting because I was like, oh, there's an explanation for this. There's a name for this. There's a group of researchers that know about this. And wow, I want peer supporters to know this because I would have loved to have known this while I was in it. And I want them to share it with other people. Or I want to share it with other people because, and this is a Dan Siegel quote, when you name it to tame it. And when people understand that this is a thing, it is less about a personal weakness, less about a personal experience of that, hey, I'm the only one, you know, seeing images of something, um,
Mhm.
like in an intrusive way at some point later, or hearing the wailing sound or that kind of stuff. I don't need to be in a padded room because that's occurring. That occurs with a
Mhm.
lot of people and is well known and is understood to actually be a survival mechanism that the brain, it indicates the brain is doing its job.
Mhm.
And
It's kind of
that
like
was just
when,
profound.
yeah, it's kind of like when I think it was Maddie in my film when he went to Dr. Amon's clinic and he put him through this brain scan
Yep.
and he could see where the brain was impacted by PTS and
Hmm.
PTSD. So, wow, it was a mind blowing experience. Like,
Hmm.
yeah, I'm not this thing. I'm not, this disorder.
Hmm. Right.
I have an injury. I have
Yep.
something that's affecting my brain. And he said it was transformative for him.
Yeah. Yeah, and I love and I love Daniel Amen's brain scans, and I've read his work, and I continue to follow his work, and I think that is incredibly important because when they actually see that it changes their physiology in real time, and that they can see, not just in real time, but over time, certain things that I recommend that they do. And then they start getting feedback from family members. And I'm thinking of one career cop that he didn't want to do it. And I call this going from woo woo to whoa, right?
Hmm.
Let's take this woo woo thing and let's turn it into a whoa when you see how it actually changes things. So he went to seeing that whoa, and then his family members thought he was just spending too much time doing breathing or doing meditations or visualizations, and they couldn't understand why he was, kind of not walling off, but kind of stepping aside to do those things instead of engaging with them. And then they started realizing, oh, when he engages with us, he's not as irritable. He is much more pleasant to be around. He's not as responsive or react. He's responsive. He's not reactive. And so I made a believer out of him and his family. And by the way, he was married to a cop, or is married to a cop. So uh, she's going, what are you doing? Right. So,
Mhm.
and so that kind of builds some confidence in the process when we use those types of things, because we see that what we measure, we can better manage, and it takes that weakness out. It actually provides strength.
Mhm. When you're working with a client and you see all different kinds of first responder clients and they come with
Mhm.
all the various baggages that they can carry into the room, right?
Mhm.
How do you then kind of assess, okay, what do we need to do first to kind of work on your specific stuff that you're dealing with?
Yeah, and that's a mutual decision. That's a collaborative conversation, because they can come in and say, I've got, workplace trauma, relationship issues, I'm drinking to cope with all this other kind of stuff, or these kinds of things. And what I really want is the relationship. I want to work on the relationship. And you're like, well, the relationship kind of needs these other things to be in place first, because you're actually bleeding on people that didn't cut you. Um, and so we've got to go to what's actually cutting you so you'll stop bleeding on them. And so it becomes a conversation around that. And then there's obviously some things that gain kind of higher priority, because if a person is drinking to cope and it's creating a physical dependence, or it's, interfering with sleep or something like that, or doing something else that's going to create more or contribute to more of a system, like a whole system, their physiology, psychology, all relational, then it is a conversation saying, hey, we've got to address this probably pretty high on the priority. And I think there's 178 or 187 hours in a week. I don't recall what the number is. And I tell people, if you get one of them with me, the rest of them are on you. And so we're not going to do it all in an hour and then everything's going to be good to go. Whatever we talk about in the hour, whatever we plan for, you've got to put forth the daily effort. And it is effort. There's no magic pill for, I mean, there's no magic pill for these kind of healing things.
Mhm.
It's going to be the systematic. You've got to do the breathing exercises. You got to do the, the sleep hygiene. If I'm recommending you making some changes to that stuff, you got to put in the work. You can't go to the
Mhm.
gym and have the personal trainer tell you, hey, this is what you do, and then just come once a week and, you know,
Yeah.
think you're going to get some guns or something. You're just
Mhm.
not.
So how do you get a cop, perhaps we'll say he, tough guy, maybe he spent some time in the Marines, he's a man's man, so to speak,
No.
to be willing to sit down with you for an hour a week. I mean, do I have to see the shrink really? I mean, how do you break through that barrier of getting them to talk and to kind of, reveal some of the things that they're hiding behind the mask?
Yeah. Well, I go to them. And that's the thing is I'm on contract with several agencies, and I suggest this to any clinician is I go to them. I go to roll calls. I I do what's called an accusation audit, and this is a negotiation technique named by uh, Chris Voss, a former FBI negotiator, and it's an accusation audit. Say you're going to accuse me of this, you're going to say this is going to be that, or I'm going to make you talk about your mom, or I'm going to make you talk about, I'm going to have you use the F word, the feelings, blah blah blah. Okay, no, I just want to help you try to figure out what's going on for you and how you take control over it. And I don't know any cop that doesn't like taking control over something. And so you come to them and you name the things that they might be thinking to indicate, I've thought of your concerns. I'm aware of your concerns, and we're just gonna get to work. And I think one of the other things that's also keeps people from, or would keep people from coming in, is they don't have any hope or belief, which is a subcomponent of hope, is belief and expectation, that the help would be helpful, regardless of my background or qualifications or whatever. They're just like, I'm too tore up from the floor up for anybody to be able to do anything. Like this just isn't a fixable thing, and I'm not going to take medication, because they have some notion that's what people are always going to suggest. And so I've got to also share stories in a non-confident, or in a confidential way, rather, in a non-identifying way, that give them hope that it's even worth their effort. And it's even worth the effort of anything they would do outside of that 1 hour of the week. They have to believe it's going to produce the thing that they want, because if they don't believe that, all is lost. They will not put forth the effort. And who would? Like, I wouldn't if I didn't think anything was going to produce something. That would just seem wasteful.
What are some of the things that you have worked with, some of your clients, that have been most effective in kind of treating some of these issues that have come up?
That's an easy one. EMDR is just a powerhouse in terms of a mode of being able to treat people's traumas, to be able to treat people's anxieties, to be able to address that. It's effective. It's structured. A lot of, and I work with all the first responders, and so it's interesting because my firefighters, they're like, it's a protocol. I like a protocol. There's a medical protocol. You do this, then that, and I understand it. And I give them the information in advance and say, this is what it is and this is why. And so the other piece of it is information. Is I want them, and I tell people, I want you to understand the signs of what's going on. I want you to know the underlying science, and just plain language stuff, no psychobabble bullshit, no, 3-4 syllable words if I have to, and the strategies. And I really, and so there's information, and then like why, and and how it ties into survival, and how what we're doing, it actually kind of cheats the system so it can stop sending you those signals, and so you can start getting your brain back to the way that you want it. And not just your brain, your whole physiology. Some people have um, heightened startle response, and they're just like, well, this is BS. I'm like, okay, here, understand why, and understand how to keep inching it back so that you recover from the startle response. You start to recognize what would cause a startle response. You start recognize, and you start kind of moving back so you have less of a startle response, and then you don't have a startle response because you are learning how to manage that. So it's information, EMDR, and a lot of nervous system training. And the training is giving them information and then giving them tools so they can manage that physiology outside of session.
Mm-hmm. So you work so in these counseling sessions, and I know I'm going through a coaching training right now, and coaching, you coach forward, you coach what's coming, where you want to go. In counseling and therapy, you kind of look back at the past a little bit. At what point is it important to help the individual, the client, the organization to look forward and say, hey, what can we do to prevent these things from happening?
And that's the model of my practice. And I write about it extensively. And I usually open a lot of my resilience trainings with the upstream parable. And if you're not familiar with the upstream parable, or your listeners aren't, there's a large river that turns into a large waterfall. And doing a condensed version. At the bottom of the waterfall, there are hundreds of people that are trying to save the people that have fallen into the river, fallen over the waterfall. They're trying to pull them to the shore and to resuscitate them. And some of them don't make it. They lose their life, their job, their relationship, their health, you name it. And one of the helpers looks upstream to see a never-ending stream of people falling in the river and being pushed downstream. So she starts making her way upstream. One of the helpers says, "Where are you going? So many people need your help here." And she says, "I'm going upstream to find out why people are falling into the river." And that's my philosophy. That's the philosophy of my practice, is that, yeah, we can make a living off helping everybody that comes to our practice or comes to my, see me in some regard for, critical incident follow-up or what have you, once they're there. But it just seems unethical and inhumane and ineffective to not go upstream and say, all right, how do I equip these people to be better swimmers? And some people, even in the psychology world, how do we screen better to make sure we have really good swimmers in the water? But I think we do a pretty good job of the screening. We just don't do a good job of helping people navigate the waters when they start getting some changes in the tide, or they start getting in over their head. They don't know they're getting in over their head yet. And so I use that metaphor extensively, especially when I'm doing peer support training and saying, what if you try to reach out to someone and they won't grab your hand, right? How do you approach them in such a way that they don't see that as a weakness to grab your hand when you put it out? How do you empower them when they're fighting with the current? They're fighting with administration, or they're fighting with citizens, or they're fighting with their spouse or significant other, or what have. How do you get them to, because if you're thrashing around in the water, you're more apt to drown. If you get on your back, take a big breath, fill up your air or your lungs with air, you can float, you can rest, and then you can start strategizing. How do you get out of the situation, right? And that's what we have to teach people to do upstream. And that is the model. And so concretely speaking, that's training at the academy level. That's training quarterly peer support. That's training at in-service. It's not a one and done deal. And training isn't the end all be all. And I was laughing about it. One of my battalion chiefs sent me a picture of a bathroom stall, and just over the urinal is a flyer on tips for getting better sleep. And they put it right over the toilet in the men's bathroom. And they thought it funny and took a picture and sent it to me. And because I complained, I said, I don't want to go into the bathroom and go into the stall and find papers that say what rigs go to what types of fires. Who gives a shit? I mean, you do, all fairness, but that's not what they need to be reading in there. They already know that. Put the information on how and there's a QR code. Gross if you go in the stall with your phone, but maybe they do, or they go back with their phone and they snap a picture of it and they got a QR code. So now they can go to something where they can get information. So if they don't talk to the peer, and they don't talk to me, and they don't talk to the chaplain, they can't avoid wellness information. And sleep is the lowest hanging fruit and probably the most fruitful thing to address anyway, because most people struggle with sleep, especially in the first responder profession.
What's the answer to that? I mean, it's $1 million question, but what's the answer to the sleep problem?
It's a multifaceted thing, and this, and I quote a lot of the work of Dr. Matthew Walker from Berkeley, and he's got a 6-part um, podcast with Andrew Huberman where he's talking about, naps and sleep hygiene and quantity versus quality and chronotypes and all, these types of things. And so I always laugh and say, okay, take your test to find out what your sleep type is, and then tell your agency, and they'll give you that shift, right? So, um, so that's not
Good luck with
obviously.
that.
I know. So, but that's the accusation
Yep.
audit in some regard, is to kind of poke fun of, there are certain things that you're going to think that you know, that I'm going to suggest that are just stupid, because people have gone to to clinicians or to doctors and they're like, oh, you shouldn't be on night shift. And they're like, no shit, but what's my option here? Like, that's
Mm-hmm.
not, so I'm going to go ahead and crack that joke, say they do shifts by chronotype, right? Sleep type. And so, but then you have to figure out, well, what's the next best thing that I can do? What is the sleep routine? What do I do the hour before I go to bed? Am I in really bright light settings voluntarily being the
Mm-hmm.
key thing, when the research shows that if you just start dimming the lights as your bedtime is approaching, and you start not even just dimming them, but you move them from up here overhead to
Mm-hmm.
lamps to kind of lower, that it simulates the setting sun. Are you using white light therapy to wake yourself up in the morning, right? Because you're waking up late in the day and the sun is already setting and your body doesn't know what to do or how to generate the energy. I have a lot of people that they're like, oh, we were so busy. I didn't get to eat. And so right when I got off shift or at the end of my shift, they eat a full meal. And food is calorie is energy. You don't need energy, because that will actually conflict with their ability to go to sleep, because they've just raised their temperature, they've raised their heart rate, they've given their body energy. So I said, well, don't go to bed starving. Nobody's going to sleep
Mm-hmm.
well there. But can you eat just enough to quell the hunger pangs, but not generate extra energy or heart rate, so that you can accomplish sleep? And so there's a lot of things around nutrition, light, movement. There's supplements, and I'm a psychologist, not a physician. So I tell people, check with your physician on these types of things, but the information is there. Like, even last night, I took uh, uh, tart cherry juice, magnesium, and water. I slept like a champ,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because
We've been taking the magnesium. Actually, they're gummies, and they're sugar free gummies. And want to make sure I
Mhm.
ordered the sugar free ones. And our sleep has been totally better because of
Yep,
that magnesium. Yep.
yeah. Because I just came back from New York the other day, so so I wouldn't ordinarily need that, but when I travel in different time zones, I'm trying to reset myself, and so
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't sleepy yet, so I was like, I'm going to go ahead and do this tart cherry juice magnesium mix, which has a little bit of stevia in it, mixed with water. It actually tastes good. So you're not like drinking it and going, well, this sucks.
Mm-hmm.
It actually tastes good. And when I looked at my metrics this morning, because I have my Aura ring, it's like, wow, you got like a
Mm-hmm.
95 on your sleep score. Good job. And I was like, well, that's just a sign of my recovery from being on a different time zone.
Mm-hmm. So, how important is it to have people in your life that you can reach out to, like peer support?
Vital, absolutely vital. And whether that's peer support or family members or friends or chaplains or pastor or, you know, childhood friends, whoever it is. And I say this with conviction, because even when I did my master's degree, when I did my thesis, it was what helps and what hinders your exposure to this chronic suffering of other people. And the number one protective factor was was family members, was having someone to talk to. The number one risk factor was family members when they didn't understand or weren't supportive. And so, and support at work was also was number two. And so we are social beings. We know, and there's some interesting documentaries on this, and I just actually saw one more recently, which was hilarious to watch, but good. Um, is that having someone help us, having someone understand us, having someone even just be there and sit with us allows us to endure so much more than if we did it on our own. And the recent documentary that I saw was, and this is, I think this is the second season of it, is called Limitless. And it's Chris
Mm.
Hemsworth goes through all these experiments where they're saying, hey, what about cold exposure or intermittent fasting or, self-talk or whatever. And it was how to mitigate pain. And they were administering shocks to him and his friends separately. And they could actually, tap out and say, okay, I'm done. Like I can't do the shocks anymore because they progressively increased the shocks. But what was interesting is when they did them separately and then they did them together as a group where they were playing like Jenga, that their perception of the pain and not just their I tapped out, but they were hooked up to all this equipment, their actual physiological perception of pain and the stress responses. So it wasn't like they were just being tough guys. Like they were measuring this biologically, was mitigated by the fact that they were laughing at each other and enjoying each other's company, and they were like childhood friends. And so people are able, in the company of someone that they know cares about them and they have a bond with, can endure so much more and I know physical pain is different than psychological pain, but the research doesn't say that that's any different. It would support
Mm.
the same. And I think Gabor Mate talks about this, a number of other trauma specialists say it is that, and even Bessel van der Kolk, it is that connection with other people and other people supporting you to get through something that makes all the difference in the world, all of it. And that's why I'm such a big
Mhm.
proponent of fortifying peer supporters and family members and whoever it is, chaplains, whoever it is.
Mhm. But it's not only, as far as peer support, it's not only important to have like a peer support team, but to have a peer support team who's well trained and who understands how to be a peer supporter.
Yes. Yeah. And I have gotten in trouble for saying this. The only thing worse than no peer support team is a bad peer support team.
Mm-hmm.
And I get in
Sure.
trouble because they're like, oh my gosh, why would you say they're bad? And I say they're bad because what makes a bad peer support team is one that isn't trained, one that isn't supported, one that isn't selected properly. And so what we don't want, and this is not a, hard and fast rule, but generally what we don't want is we don't want someone to say, hey, who wants to do peer support? I do.
Right.
And that person may not have the psychological mindedness, may have different motivations, may have different levels of insight into their own practices, may not be a good example to others, right? They may have the truest heart ever to do it, but not have the psychological capability to do it or the insight on healthy boundaries so that they are effective, and they're effective not at their own expense. And so
But it could be
that
the
is a
team
concern.
gossip too.
I have heard that as well, where they don't understand or don't honor the confidentiality, and it is a maker. Like my job, it is make or break. It is make or break. If you do not earn first responders' trust again once broken, it's done. It's done.
Have you seen any agencies that really want their peer support to kind of let the command staff know what's going on, or is that not a thing anymore?
There's a tug of war between them where, and I even see this when, a command staff person will say, hey, look, we had an incident, or hey, we have a person that's struggling. I was told that they said they come to you. I'm not asking you anything. I'm just passing this information along. And then other times they'll say, can I ask you this one thing? But if you can't say it without it breaking confidentiality, we'll figure out another way for me to figure out what we're supposed to do. I don't ever, and this is, I'm kind of on a soapbox about this recently. I don't ever have administrators ask me for inappropriate things. And so it drives me crazy when I see these posts saying they don't care, or it's that so-and-so's in so-and-so's pocket. And I'm sure it exists. Maybe I'm just lucky, or maybe it's something I set up by design. nobody asked me anything. They just, and there are times, and I recently, like I said, was traveling. And so I had some of my clinicians covering me, and they said, oh, hey, if this happens or that happens, do we have to get permission to see people, or what's the procedure or the contract for that? And I said, see the people. The agencies will never question. Just get the people in, see the people, and we'll bill later. They never ask us, who was it or what was this about or anything, because we have a standing order: take care of our people. Period. Take care of
Mhm.
them. And they don't. I mean, I say don't ask any questions. They'll just say, is this something that you're going to? I'm trying to think of how they've asked it before. Um, did this come in through peer support? Yes, it came in through peer support. Okay, all I need to know, because they just want to be able to explain to somebody else that they have to answer to. And so it's actually kind of nice to know, but I don't think most people know that. And I've seen a lot of discussions on LinkedIn and things like that where people are just like, they don't care, or so and so's and so and so's, or even Facebook support groups. And it drives me crazy where, because they are, instead of supporting their people, they're actually creating more paranoia around talking to a clinician and more paranoia about talking to peer support. And I've actually even a few times, and I've stopped doing it too much, called them out on it and said, how is this supposed to help your person help themselves
Mhm.
if you're just fear mongering? I don't understand. Yes, there are some clinicians that don't know what they're doing, but these blanket statements saying nobody understands this, how, and you're a support group, how is this supporting your peers? This sounds like you not being well, putting shit
Mhm.
out into the universe because of your own shit. Deal with your own shit and stop spraying it on everybody else that's trying to get help. And
Mhm.
that's what we also don't want in a peer team. And so I've had a couple of instances where peer teams that I'm not associated with, thankfully, have so terrified their peers about the workers' comp process or the independent medical examinations that occur in the workers' comp process or this or that, that I started doing webinars and said, stop doing that to them, because they're
Mhm.
going in so panic stricken to go be evaluated that they can't even fully participate in the process, or they're traumatized by you and then they go in, the process didn't turn out like they thought, but then they still don't know what to think because you told them it was going to be horrible and it wasn't horrible. And so now they're thinking, did I just get tricked?
Mhm.
And it was not a trick to begin with. Um, and so you're actually making your peers worse. And I'm
Mhm.
not saying don't give them information, but give it to them in a balanced, realistic way, right?
Mhm.
Same thing. They think there's being cleared by me after a critical incident. It's like, no, you're not.
Mhm.
That's not my role. My role is to support you, not to clear you for returning to work.
Mhm.
So there's a lot. And again, that's what some peer support folks, official or otherwise, who are not trained, who are not supported or connected to a clinician, understand how the process goes. They're actually not trying to create harm. They're trying to protect or help the person, but they're creating harm
Mhm.
when they do that.
Mhm. So going back to our kind of a previous discussion about the people upriver, looking at an individual, and we know that so many first responders come into the profession with a high ACEs score.
Mhm.
How important is it to kind of unpack some of those things for a young first responder? Maybe they're in the academy or early on in their career. How important is it to kind of address some of those things early so that they don't carry that further into their career?
Well, I think, it's, everyone's very, or most people are familiar with the ACEs, the Adverse Childhood Experiences Scale. But are they familiar with the Benevolent Childhood Experiences Scale, the BCES? So if they had adversity, did they also have a coach or a friend's parent or somebody else that was a positive influence on them? So while having the negative experience, did they have something that actually turned that negative experience into a strength for them, post-traumatic growth, a life skill? Because I think oftentimes what we're seeing nowadays is more people are not coming in with the adverse childhood experience. They're coming in with minimal adversity experience at all. And so they don't have resilience, not
Mm,
because they had an adverse childhood experience,
mhm,
but because they didn't have any to overcome to build any
mhm,
kind of um, skill or uh, ability to be uncomfortable, those types of things, because we have more, and I've talked about it in other places, instead of having helicopter parents, we've had more snowplow parents that have removed all barriers
mhm,
from them. So they haven't had that. And so
mhm,
I have actually done a few trainings on generational differences in the workplace because these uh, field training officers and coaches are just like, oh my gosh, the first time they have adversity, they don't know what in the world. Like it's a like they're stumped. They don't know what to do. Like they can't take critical feedback. They can't take, those types of things. And so I think I pay more attention to that. But obviously, in a clinical setting, we do talk about, it's stereotypical clinician shit. We do talk about, okay, where did you learn this?
mhm.
How did you come to believe you're supposed to sacrifice yourself? And I don't mean, officers sacrificing their life for someone else. That's an oath you take, and that's a choice that you make regardless of childhood stuff. I'm talking about, they don't speak up or they don't do something else because make room for somebody else kind of thing. And so where did you learn that's what you're supposed to do? That so I certainly address that in a clinical setting. And I do talk about ACEs and the BCES when I visit with people and in service as well, or resilience training. So but it oftentimes is a big conversation when we talk about, is resilience something you learn or something that you have? And that ends up being an hour-long debate, which is incredible.
Mhm. So, how can someone that perhaps they were as a part of that snowplow parent, or they were a child of that snowplow parent, how can they develop resilience when tough stuff happens? Is that something you can teach?
You can teach it. And this is where coaches, and there was a reason I was requested to teach this to a peer team that was predominantly had a lot of FTOs in it. So they were doing both hats. You're like, oh my gosh, most of us are field training officers and peer support, and we're just like, this is tiring. And so it's about how they can mentor them and help them and take their approach to them. And I said, they also look at you and say you're jaded and you forget what it's like to be them, and you forget you're not looking at some of these things with beginner's eyes. And so you also have to adjust your approach to that. And you may not like it, you may not want it, but what's the other option? Someone gets pushed out who has good potential to actually learn. I think also just kind of, I think a really good thing would be, I'm an avid reader, and I think just having people read Carol Dweck's book Mindset for making a distinction between that fixed mindset, I'm good or I'm bad, or the growth mindset, I'm growing as I'm making mistakes. But I think that is something people can learn, but I think it also has to be part of the training agenda. Because when I was a trainer in the police academy as an officer, it was interesting how, did we let everybody win, or did we have instances and training scenarios where they didn't win, but that's actually part of reality. We didn't set them up to like fail, because that's obviously not a good training strategy. But how do we balance it in such a way that and how do we message it in such a way to say, you're going to do all these things and this is what you're accountable for, but the responsibility for the outcome is actually shared among many other people. And first responders, I oftentimes say, are really the last responders, because they're there when 99% of the scenario is already done. Someone's already
Mm,
had the childhood that led him to the substance abuse, that's led him to the domestic violence, that's led him to be drunk that night for the event that occurred earlier in the day. You're coming in that last portion of this. And so what you're accountable for is what you bring to that last little bit of the situation versus being responsible for all of it. And so trying to keep some perspective on that. And even if you screw up, um, did you learn anything from it?
mm.
right? Even if you screwed up in that last 1%.
So as we kind of wrap up here, I want to have you give our listeners maybe one or two action steps that they can do to build I see your title of your book, and you have that subtitle is Strengthening Your Mental Armor. What's one or two tools that they can put to practice today to strengthen their mental armor?
That's the $1 million question. You may have to edit this one because I'm like, how do I pull it down to one or two?
Right.
Well, I think part of it really is, awareness precedes change. And so you've got to be aware of what the threats are to your armor. Like what is it that's threatening you? Is it your sleep habits? Is it your thought processes? Do you have negative self-talk that says this sucks, you suck, that's always going to suck, right? So, and if you're not aware of that, there is going to be no change to those outward behaviors or those inner behaviors in terms of how you're approaching something and how you're thinking about it. I think back to some of the research on coping, and when you have adversity, you can see adversity as a threat to you. And I'm not, if someone's trying to kill you, it's a threat. Let's just be realistic. But if you see all adversity as a threat to establishment or to your values or to your peace of mind or what have you, versus seeing it as a challenge to be overcome, something to be learned, something to be navigated. I think if you can think of it as a challenge to be overcome, and your mindset is this is figure outable, I'll figure it out. I'll get through this, and this will be behind me. And then those are the types of things. So I think just your mindset about it and your awareness of it, and then all the other tools, I think, flow from those kind of core pieces, whether it be, sleep hygiene or mental or nervous system training or any of those types of things would flow from those two pieces.
And the mindset thing for me has always just been, it's such a key part of being human, and how it can take us down a negative path and down up a positive path. And I know in my own life, I've had to develop, a new mindset over some things. And that's challenging. That's hard. It's hard to change a way of thinking, especially being brought up in a certain way and, thinking a certain thing, and to have to relearn something in a new way. It's challenging, but once you have that breakthrough, it opens up a whole new world of possibilities.
Yeah. Well, and I guess that would be the third one, is that if you're like, okay, I'm going to stop, seeing it as a threat, I'm going to stop using this negative self-talk and so on and so forth. And if you have a bad day because you didn't sleep the night before, or you went to call, or, your kid threw up on you, or somebody's traffic, whatever, start again. If you lost your focus on these types of things, or you splurged and didn't, eat as well or do whatever you normally are supposed to do, start again and again and again. This Japanese proverb, fall 7, rise 8. Right.
Yeah. And, I have a phrase that I kind of coined last year, where I said, you have to be persistent at being consistent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And that's how you're going to get better, is that persistent consistency.
Yeah. So. Yeah. And that's it. You and I are singing the same song. And again, but I think that comes back to that awareness. Are you aware you're not being consistent, or are you just getting kind of caught up in whatever else is, grabbing your attention in the moment? And then for you to go, oh, it's one thing to miss one workout, or to miss one breathing exercise, or to miss one moment of, date night or whatever with your significant other. It's a whole other thing to miss it 3 times in a row. Right.
Stephanie, thank you so much for being on the program. Thanks for what you do. Any final words for our listeners, and let us know where we can contact you as well.
I hope that you found this helpful. I hope that you practice your own resilience. That is, you're listening to this and other podcasts, you're thinking for yourself as much as you're thinking for other people, because you can't help people yourself unless you are caring for yourself. And so how to reach me, I'm on all the major media sites in terms of LinkedIn, and I have a First Responder Psychology Facebook page, and firstresponderpsychology.com is my website. And I tell people, if you want a copy of the new expanded edition with some dog hair and probably some of mine as well in the tape and in the packaging, you can actually buy it. And I'll a signed copy from my website with some extra dog hair on it. So.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on the program. We look forward to your work, and to hopefully we can be meeting in person sometime soon.
Sounds good. So, thank you.
Well, that's it for today's episode of the First Responder Wellness Podcast. A huge thanks to Dr. Stephanie Conn for sharing her wisdom, her story, and all the practical advice she gave us. Remember, resilience isn't a personality trait. It's something you can build every day. Hey, if today's episode resonated with you, share it with a friend, a fellow first responder, or someone on your peer support team. I think they would enjoy it. And don't forget, you can grab a signed copy of Stephanie's expanded book on her website at firstresponderpsychology.com. The link is in the show notes below. As I promised, next week is a very special episode of the podcast. It's going to be episode number 100. It's hard to believe that we're hitting the triple digits, but I'm really excited about it. And I've brought on some very special guests for the show. So if you're familiar with my documentary film, PTSD 911, you know Maddie Fiorenza and Desiree Palmer. They're two of the primary characters in the film. Maddie is a firefighter retired out of Anaheim, California, and Desiree is a police officer retired out of Maryland. And they will both be with me on the show to give us an update on what they've been up to since the PTSD 911 film came out. It's going to be a really special conversation. And so if you have not subscribed, now'd be a great time to do that. Just hit the subscribe button and then share it with a friend or a colleague and let them know that this special episode's coming up next week. Finally, please remember that you are not alone. And if you need someone to talk to and don't know where you can turn, you can always dial 988 for help. Until next time, be well, take care of yourself and those around you, and go out and do something great in the world.